Have you ever felt that the deeper you think, the lonelier you become? That the more clearly you see, the more others pull away? You're not imagining it, because history has a pattern. It punishes those who think too deeply, too honestly, too far ahead. From Socrates to Galileo, from Nietzsche to Tesla, the world has ridiculed, rejected, or silenced some of its brightest minds. Not because they were wrong, but because they made others uncomfortable. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most unapologetically honest philosophers in history, called it what it is. Intelligence, at its core, is a curse. A gift that isolates, a clarity that offends. But why? Why does society resist those who think differently? Why does truth, when spoken with depth, often provoke discomfort instead of curiosity? To understand this, we need to look deeper, not into intellect itself, but into human psychology. Imagine this. When you stand next to someone physically strong, you might admire them. When you meet someone wealthy, you may feel envy, but rarely shame. When someone is beautiful, it might spark comparison, but not identity collapse. But when you meet someone intellectually sharper than you, something else stirs. Psychologists call it the mirror effect. A deep thinker doesn't just share ideas. They reflect something deeper, your limitations, your unexamined beliefs, the fragility of your certainty. And that hurts. The discomfort isn't personal. Even if the deep thinker says nothing, their very presence feels like a threat, not to your safety, but to your self-image. Because unlike strength or wealth, intelligence touches something sacred, your identity. We define ourselves by how we think, by our worldview, our opinions, our beliefs. So when someone questions that, especially with clarity, nuance, and logic, it doesn't feel like a conversation. It feels like an attack. This is why society, generation after generation, has resisted its deepest thinkers. Not because they're wrong, but because they challenge egos. And egos will do almost anything to avoid discomfort. Take a moment to reflect. Have you ever tried to share a complex thought only to be met with blank stares? Have you noticed how people deflect or change the subject when a discussion goes deeper than gossip or surface-level talk? That's not coincidence. That's psychological defense. When confronted with deeper thinking, most minds don't engage. They resist. They retreat. They mock. Because it's easier to dismiss the person than to dismantle a worldview. That's why philosophers, visionaries, and intellectuals often find themselves on the edges of social circles. Not because they want isolation, but because society quietly pushes them away. Here's the irony. Studies show that confidence is often valued more than actual intelligence in social settings. People gravitate toward those who project certainty, even if that certainty masks shallowness. That's why loud, simplistic voices thrive. The charismatic influencer, the confident but hollow speaker, they repeat what people want to hear, not what they need to confront. Meanwhile, the deep thinkers, the ones who speak slowly, with nuance, with self-doubt and depth, struggle to find a wide audience. Why? Because truth unsettles, and society prefers comfort. This is the paradox of intelligence. The closer you get to truth, the further you drift from the crowd. Not because you're antisocial, but because truth rarely fits inside what society has agreed to believe. And that mirror effect, it doesn't just reflect individuals' discomfort, it reveals why society resists change itself. But we're not done, because if intelligence really does provoke fear, is there proof? Is there science behind it? Stay with me. Because what comes next doesn't just confirm your experience. It explains exactly why society would rather silence you than listen to you. Science has finally confirmed what many deep thinkers have felt for centuries. When you walk into a room with clarity and depth, people don't just get uncomfortable, they feel threatened. A study in neuroscience reveals a startling fact. When people feel intellectually inferior, their amygdala, the fear center of the brain, activates as if facing danger. In plain terms, deep thinking triggers the same fear response as a physical threat. But why? Why does a complex idea feel like an attack? Why does a thoughtful question spark anxiety instead of dialogue? The answer lies in evolution. For thousands of years, survival didn't depend on who had the deepest thoughts. It depended on who belonged to the tribe. Back then, being excluded meant death. So the brain evolved to prioritize belonging, not truth. Harmony over insight, comfort over complexity, conformity over clarity. So when a deep thinker enters a room and starts asking hard questions, they're not just sharing thoughts, they're disrupting the ancient wiring of the human brain. Because what the group feels isn't curiosity, it's threat. Their presence shakes the unspoken rules, their words become unwelcome spotlights, and the tribe reacts. That's why many deep thinkers find themselves isolated, not because they're socially awkward, but because their mind is a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see. A 2021 Stanford University study revealed something even more revealing. Deep thinkers are tolerated one-on-one, but in groups, they become a threat. Why? Because in groups, status becomes visible. People don't just worry about what the thinker says. They worry about how others might perceive them in comparison. It's no longer about truth. It's about hierarchy. And in that game, clarity becomes dangerous. So what happens? The group retaliates through subtle exclusion, dismissal, sarcasm, all in the name of protecting the group order. This explains why many deep thinkers feel at home in intimate, thoughtful conversations, but alienated in crowds. And it doesn't stop there. Modern psychology has mapped the very biases that keep intelligence at bay. The Dunning-Kruger effect. Those who know the least often think they know the most. Those who know the most, they doubt themselves. It's a paradox that breeds arrogance in the wrong places and humility in the right ones. Status quo. Bias. The brain clings to the familiar. It rejects new ideas not because they're false, but because they're uncomfortable. Intelligence is disruptive, and disruption is rarely welcome. The backfire effect. Show someone facts that contradict their beliefs, and they won't change. They'll double down. Because it's not about logic, it's about identity. And then comes the digital age, where truth must compete against noise. Social media doesn't reward thought, it rewards reaction. Algorithms don't care about wisdom, they care about engagement. So what goes viral? Not depth, not reflection, but outrage, simplicity, sensationalism. A shallow opinion wrapped in confidence will always outpace a nuanced truth delivered with care. That's why deep thinkers struggle in the age of content. Because truth isn't quick, it doesn't fit in a soundbite, and society has lost its patience for anything that takes more than 10 seconds to process. So what now? If you're a deep thinker, understand this. The resistance you face isn't just social. It's biological, psychological, cultural, and increasingly technological. But that doesn't mean you stop thinking. It doesn't mean you silence yourself. It just means you stop expecting understanding from a world addicted to illusion. Because clarity has never been popular, but it has always been powerful. And those who choose to see, even when it costs them everything, are the ones who carry the world forward. Why is it that intelligence, the very thing we praise in public, is often punished in private? The answer is uncomfortable. Society doesn't embrace intelligence. It embraces comfort. It values what is predictable over what is true. And that's where the rift begins. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most painfully honest philosophers in history, saw this with brutal clarity. He didn't see intelligence as a gift. He saw it as a burden. Unlike optimistic thinkers who believed that intellect would lead to happiness or success, Schopenhauer argued something far more disturbing. The more intelligent you are, the more you will suffer. But why? His entire philosophy rests on a single idea, what he called the will, an invisible, irrational force that drives all living beings. Most people, Schopenhauer claimed, are blindly driven by this will. They seek comfort, pleasure, security. They don't question this path, they just follow it. But the few, those cursed with deeper awareness, don't serve the will to live. They awaken a will to truth, an unrelenting hunger to understand reality. Even if that reality is ugly, even if the truth brings loneliness, not comfort, even if it dismantles every illusion society clings to. And that is why intelligent people suffer. Not because they're weak, not because they're arrogant, but because they see too much. They see through the rituals and the noise. They recognize that most of what excites the crowd, money, validation, competition, relationships, are often just distractions, masks to cover the existential silence underneath. This puts them at odds with the world. Where others find joy in small talk, the deep thinker feels an emptiness. Where others chase ambition, the thinker questions the very meaning of ambition. And where others feel fulfillment in acceptance, the thinker feels the burden of conformity. Schopenhauer put it simply, a high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial, because the more you understand, the less you can participate. The more you notice, the harder it is to smile politely. The more awake you are, the more you wish you could fall asleep again. This is the true paradox of intelligence. It gives you clarity, but takes away belonging. It opens your eyes, but shuts the door to ordinary happiness. That's why deep thinkers like Kafka, Pascal, Nietzsche, often drowned in solitude, suffered through existential despair, and lived as strangers in their own time. But Schopenhauer didn't leave us in despair. He offered a map. If you're someone who sees too deeply, feels too much, and fits too little, here's what he taught. Embrace solitude. Don't fear being alone. Use it. Solitude is not punishment. It's the space where your mind can breathe, where ideas are born without interruption. Seek your kind. Not everyone will understand you, and that's okay. Don't dilute yourself to be accepted by the many. Connect with the few who also walk this road, whether through books, philosophy, or silent knowing. Guard your truths. Don't throw your depth into crowds that only want noise. Observe first. Speak only when it serves. Wisdom is not just what you know. It's knowing when to say nothing. And if you've ever asked yourself, why am I like this? Why do I feel so out of place? Know this, you are not broken. You are just ahead of your time. And that is a lonely place to be, because society doesn't fear intelligence. It fears what intelligence exposes. The thinker isn't rejected because they're wrong, but because they are right too early. And truth, when it arrives too soon, feels like violence to those still asleep. You are not alone because you think too much. You feel distant not because something is wrong with you, but because the world was never built for those who see too deeply. Society does not elevate depth. It rewards stability. It praises comfort, not complexity. That's why shallow conversations, simple ideas, and repeated distractions dominate every space we enter. But why? Because the human brain isn't wired for truth. It's wired for certainty, for predictability, for safety. This is cognitive ease, a mental shortcut where your mind favors the familiar over the true, because it requires less energy, less risk, and less confrontation with what's uncomfortable. It's why most people resist change, even if that change is progress. There's another principle called system justification, our tendency to defend the very systems that limit us, not because they're right, but because they're known. And what's known feels safe. And then there's groupthink, the pull to fit in, to believe what everyone else believes, even when those beliefs are hollow. People don't want to stand out. They want to belong. This is why thinkers get rejected, not because they're wrong, but because they think outside the circle, and the crowd protects the circle. In the digital age, it gets worse. Algorithms are not built for nuance. They reward emotion, outrage, simplicity. Who gets attention? Not the philosopher, but the entertainer. Not the one who makes you think, but the one who gives you something easy to feel. In such a world, the deep voice gets silenced, not with violence, but with indifference. And the rejection doesn't just happen online. It starts earlier, in schools that teach obedience, not curiosity, in workplaces that promote conformity, not innovation, in politics that reward popularity, not truth. Do schools really reward intelligence? No, they reward memorization. Do companies value brilliance? No, they value those who fit the culture. Do political systems favor logic? Rarely. They favor emotion, comfort, slogans. History proves it. Galileo was imprisoned. Van Gogh died in poverty. Tesla faded in obscurity. Only once their ideas became safe, once they could no longer disrupt, did society embrace them. That's the paradox. We don't fear intelligence. We fear what it reveals. So if you think deeply and feel like the world turns its back, you are not broken. You are simply seeing too clearly, too early. Socrates chose death over denial, a cup of poison rather than a betrayal of truth. His final words echo through centuries. The unexamined life is not worth living. But what do those words really mean? They mean this: truth has a cost, and history is written by those willing to pay it. Galileo paid with silence. He shattered illusions with a telescope, and in return, the church threatened to break his body. To protect power, they labeled him a heretic and locked him in his own home. He died in obscurity, though his discoveries now sit in every science book. Nietzsche paid with madness. He didn't attack morality. He revealed it as myth. He said God was dead not to provoke, but to awaken. At the time, people called him insane. Now, his work defines modern philosophy. Tesla paid with poverty. While others profited from power, he dreamed of giving it away. Wireless energy, free electricity, ideas that threatened the elite. So they erased him. He died alone, in a hotel room the world had forgotten. Turing paid with his body. He cracked codes and shortened wars. He saved lives. But because he loved differently, he was punished chemically, driven to suicide. Today, we build computers on the foundation he laid, but we couldn't bear his truth when it was alive. Even Hypatia, in an ancient world where thought was power, was torn apart for daring to teach reason. Her death, like the others, was not just murder, it was the silencing of depth. And yet, their ideas lived on, because truth doesn't die with the thinker, it waits. Society doesn't fear intelligence. It fears what intelligence demands: change, accountability, awakening. So what does this mean for you? If you are someone who sees more than others see, who questions where others obey, who seeks meaning while others seek comfort, then you will be misunderstood. That is not a flaw. It is a signal. It means you're awake. But here's what matters. Don't try to wake everyone. Most people aren't ready. Save your energy for those who are. One aligned soul is worth more than 1,000 echoes. You don't need to go silent. You need to grow wise. Find the language that bridges your depth with their world. Make the complex clear, the profound simple. As Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Wisdom is not only what you see, it's what you can share. So keep thinking deeply, but more than that, live deeply. Let your life be the proof of your vision. Let your silence be powerful. Let your actions speak where words cannot. Final invitation. Call to action. Stoic. Clear. Strong. If you've ever felt rejected for thinking too much, you're not broken. You're ahead of your time. And if this video stirred something inside you, write in the comments. Depth is not a flaw. It is my compass. And subscribe. Not to follow noise, but to walk a path of clarity. This isn't just content. It's a revolution of thought. And if you're still here, it means you're ready.